So I'm going to start with a question. Who is the greatest mathematician of the 20th century? And of course the title of my talk is kind of a giveaway regarding which answer I intend. But I want to emphasize that I mean, some of you are my colleagues at the math department, and if I were to walk around through the corridors of the math department and ask each and every one the answer to this question, I could easily get a dozen different answers. There are a lot of candidates. Ramanujan, Poincaré, maybe, Emmy Noether, Andrei Kolmogorov. If you go and ask the probabilists, some of them will mention him. Or some more recent names like Grothendieck, Wiles. Also Kurt Gödel, and his name will reappear later in this talk. And we could add further names. I think if we asked Stephen Wolfram, he would probably say Stephen Wolfram. There is Paul Erdős, legendary combinatorialist. Claude Shannon, inventor of information theory. David Hilbert, great visionary in the early part of the century. And perhaps the most powerful mind of them all and a great applied mathematician, John von Neumann. I mean, so I'm going to talk about Turing here, but if it weren't for that, he would be also possibly top of my list. But for today, I'm going to put Turing top of the list. Both Turing and von Neumann had great impact on the development of computing. But Turing wrote the one paper that can be said to originate the entire field of computer science. So this is not so much going to be a biographical talk, but more about his ideas. But just for context, let me say a few words about his tragically short life. He was born in London in 1912 and didn't even get to turn 42 years of age before he tragically died a few weeks before his 42nd birthday. He was a bright kid. Children of so his father was a mid-level executive in the colonial administration in India, but his parents wanted him to grow up in England, so he spent most of his childhood in foster care with friends, and then at boarding schools. So in particular, I mentioned the Sherborne boarding school, where he spent his years between ages 14 and 18. So as I said, he was a very bright kid, and his interests were very much in the direction of mathematics and the natural sciences. And this was not the kind of thing that was prioritized at Sherborne, where the ideal that the teachers were pushing the pupils towards was more towards becoming a well-educated person in terms of humanities and subjects like Latin and so on. And they weren't able to get young Alan Turing to engage seriously in that, and he wasn't into sports either, and it was a difficult time for him. He spoke afterwards about the one good thing about going to boarding school is that you know for sure that things are never going to get any worse than that later in life. And his biographer Andrew Hodges remarks dryly that while Alan Turing made a lot of correct predictions in his life, this one turned out wrong. It's a wonderful book. Came out in the 1980s. I read it some 10 years later, 30 years ago. 600 pages, so a very, very ambitious biography. And I reread it a couple of months ago and found it very, very worthwhile reading another round. Okay, so after Sherborne, Turing went on to Cambridge, which was a much better environment for him, and he started to flourish, at least in relative terms. But yes, one could say that he did actually flourish, because one of the things that quickly came out was his remarkable paper from 1936, written at the age of 23, on computable numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem, which solved one of the greatest outstanding mathematical problems at the time. I will come back to that. This led him also to cross the Atlantic and spend a year or two at Princeton together with Alonzo Church, who had done similar work. And his what he did was quickly understood by the experts to be truly important. But the kind of recognition that he has now would take until long after his passing to happen. So his work into the foundations of mathematics was interrupted by war. So I say 1938 here, so already the year before the breakout of the war, he was recruited as a consultant to Bletchley Park, where they did this British intelligence work on cryptology and cryptanalysis, where Turing's remarkable mathematical talent really became a helpful thing. But when I read the biography and the various letters and so on that Turing has written, it seems clear to me that cryptanalysis was not his true interest. What he wanted to do was more fundamental issues in mathematics and in science more broadly. So we should think of his years at Bletchley Park, which turned out extremely important for the outcome of the Second World War, as something that he did for his country, rather than the other parts of his work earlier and after that, which were more driven from the inside. So I'm not a historian, but historians suggest that the work done at Bletchley Park under Turing's scientific leadership had profound impact on the war. So the situation was that, as you know, Great Britain is an island, and when the Germans took over most of Europe, they were cut off from Europe, but they needed all sorts of things, foods and weaponry and so on. And for that, they relied on shipping traffic across the Atlantic. And that was under great threat from mainly from German submarines. So, but by breaking the German crypto, they were able to figure out where these submarines at any given time, more or less, where they were located. There were deep dilemmas involved in this, in not acting in such a way as to get the Germans to understand that they had broken the crypto. But in the end, they were able to take great advantage of this. And the suggestion from the historians is that this probably shortened the war by a couple of years and saved millions of lives. So that was great. The war ended in 1945. Alan Turing then took up a position at the National Physics Laboratory with the task of working on the so-called automatic computing engine, which was meant to be one of the first physical realizations of the so-called universal Turing machine that was invented in his 1936 paper. From there, he went on to the University of Manchester, and his writings from these last 5 or 6 years of his life are mostly in two directions. One is on visionary ideas about where the computing technology that he had helped invent, where this could lead in the longer run, what it could mean to humanity, and in particular, there's his famous 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, that I will talk a little bit about. The other direction was that he started work on morphogenesis, how shape happens in biology, how something human-shaped can come out of a single amorphous cell, or similarly for other species. So this is, of course, a very fundamental question, and this is typical of his entire work. He wanted to understand how things like shape and life and intelligence and so on could come about from simpler constituents. Turing was homosexual, and this was in the days when this was prohibited in the United Kingdom. And in 1952, it so happened that he had a burglary in his home, which he reported to the police, and they started investigating this crime. And Turing found out from his young lover, or got circumstantial evidence that it was a friend of this lover who had committed the burglary. So he reported this to the police. He knew, of course, the law concerning these things. The term used in those days for male homosexual activities was a gross indecency. But he couldn't imagine that such an outdated, ridiculous law would actually be implemented. So he spoke totally openly to the police about this, and they decided that beside this burglary, there had been a much bigger crime committed here, for which Turing was sentenced to prison, but with the option of exchanging the prison sentence for hormonal treatment. And he chose the latter, and these had some bodily effects on him that were not so good, and probably also psychological effects. And in June 1954, he was suddenly found, unexpectedly found dead in his home. So most people who have looked into this agree that this was suicide, but there are also remaining speculations that this might also have been an accident, because he did a lot of chemistry experiments at home, and his death might not have been on purpose. We don't know this for sure, but the main theory here is suicide. So that's a brief recap of his life, and I want to say a bit more about these two papers. First, the 1936 paper on computable numbers, and then the 1950 paper. So the 1936 paper, I should say something first about the context here, because no mathematician or scientist, no matter how brilliant, works entirely in a vacuum. And the background here is how David Hilbert in the 1920s had formulated a very ambitious program for laying the foundations of mathematics. And he was hoping for an axiomatic system where one could devise a procedure that would be able to determine for any mathematical statement within this system whether it's true or false. So my impression is that most mathematicians at the time who thought about this thought that this would probably be true, although G.H. Hardy objected on it on kind of ideological grounds, because it seemed to degrade the role of a mathematician to something quite mechanical. But Kurt Gödel in 1931 showed that the answer is no, and in general, for any axiomatic system powerful enough to encompass the natural numbers will have statements that are not provable within the system. But there remain the possibility, so you can't devise a general procedure here for determining true from false. But what you could still possibly recover was to figure out whether a statement was provable versus not provable within the system. But even the answer to that, as Turing showed, would be no. I mentioned Max Newman here, who's not brilliant on the level of Hilbert or Gödel or Turing, but he was a mathematics professor at Cambridge at the time when Turing arrived there, and it was through his lectures that Turing learned about this problem area, and Newman was also very helpful with the publication of Turing's manuscript, and also later on in Turing's career. And I think that this is quite an important role for senior scientists to notice when there are younger people around whose talent exceeds their own, and help clear the way from them, or maybe in some situations push them mildly in the right direction, and so on. So Turing in this paper showed that no, there is no procedure for determining whether a mathematical statement is provable or not within a given system. And to do this, I should also say that this result, he was actually scooped by a few months by Alonzo Church in Princeton, whom he would later visit. But the work was entirely independent, And when you compare their approaches, Church invented his famous lambda calculus, which is more formalistic or algebraic in its nature. And I think that Turing's approach is more like mechanistic and at least for me, much easier to understand. So what we see here is the artist's impression of a Turing machine. Of course, Turing himself did not use that term, but it quickly became established. So a Turing machine has a finite number of possible internal states, and it operates in discrete time. At each time unit, it can switch from one state to another. It can also write a 0 or a 1 on the tape, on the exact spot of this bi-infinite binary tape that it's sitting on. And it can also move one step to the left or one step to the right on this tape. And that's all it can do. So given this finite set of states and a table declaring what it should do given each combination of internal state and the digit seen on the tape right where it's standing. This table determines the next action from the set of possible actions that I mentioned. One can also include a particular state called the halting state, where the machine does nothing. And one particularly important reason for that, theoretically, is that Turing showed that the so-called halting problem was of particular importance. The problem of determining whether a given Turing machine with a given initial state, where I forgot to say the initial state is always, so that's a sequence of zeros and ones on the tape, and it can only have a finite number of ones. So everything is like the initial content of the memory is finite, but then we can have situations where the machine goes on and writes more and more ones further away on the tape indefinitely. But the finite configuration is always finite. The halting problem is the problem of determining whether a given Turing machine with a given initial configuration halts or not. Turing showed that there was no mechanical procedure to determine this for all Turing machines and for all initial states. To make this precise, he had to define what we know as a universal Turing machine. So it's one particular Turing machine that is capable of emulating any other Turing machine with any other initial state. So what happens here is that you feed the universal Turing machine with a like a coded binary description of the Turing machine you're interested in, whether interested in emulating, together with the initial input. And in this way, he could formalize the halting problem, and he showed that there is no way to determine the halting of arbitrary combinations of Turing machines and input. One important thing here is the idea of, and this goes back also to Gödel, to represent computer programs, or to represent Turing machines as computer programs written in binary, so that programs and data are somehow put on equal footing. This is an essential ingredient in giving this negative reply to Hilbert's Entscheidungsproblem. But it's also like fundamental to all of computer science. We now take for granted that we have machines such that as our laptops and telephones and so on. And when we want a new application, we don't need to construct a new laptop every time we have a new mathematical problem or a new computer application we want to solve. We can do everything on these universal machines. So this is really the starting point for computer science. And this, with some years delay because of the war, there started really intense work on both sides of the Atlantic in actually building these machines. Of course, there's no way to literally, if we are to be really, really pedantic and precise about things, we can't build a universal Turing machine because we can't have an infinite memory. But we can approximate universal Turing machines arbitrarily well. And around in the early 1950s, we had the first machines that in practice worked as these universal Turing machines. Okay, so now I'm going to skip forward to Turing's 1950 paper, Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence, where he addresses the question of whether machines can think. And he starts the paper by saying this is too vague a question, too vague to be properly addressed. So I'm going to replace it by a different question. And this is the question that he phrases in terms of what has become known as the Turing test. So this test has 3 participants, 2 of them sitting behind the wall, and to the right we see the judge, who is able to communicate with the text interface with the 2 other participants. And the object of the human behind the wall is just to come across as a human. And the object of the machine there is also to come across as a human. And Turing, in arguing for a kind of behavioristic, functionalistic view of what thinking and intelligence really is, suggests that in a situation where the judge can no longer tell with high probability who is the human and who is the machine through this text interface communication. In such a situation, we should say that the machine is able to think. So rather than asking deep questions about what's going on inside the machine, questions about conscious experience and so on, he has this more practical setup. But this is, from Turing's point of view, when I read his paper, it seems clear to me that he just means this as a thought experiment to argue a philosophical point. And if we had just as another thought experiment, let's say that we could transport Turing to our days and let him see how we talk about artificial intelligence, and in particular about the Turing test today, I think he would have been surprised and astonished. You know, for 30 years, from like 1990 to 2020, they had this annual competition the Loebner Prize, about who could write the most human-like AI chatbot. So I think it was in 2020 when they eventually decided that this is no point anymore. I mean, we're past the point where we need to ask this question. But it was treated for a long time as a kind of an important benchmark to achieve, and I don't think Turing meant that at all. His point was much more philosophical and concerned what we really mean by intelligence. The kinds of, he has examples of exchanges that could take place in this kind of test, and just to show how deep and intricate discussions he would be required from the machine in order to fake a human. So here the judge asks, so first the judge has asked the machine to write a sonnet, and then he says, in the first line of your sonnet, which reads, shall I compare thee to the summer's day, would not a spring day do as well or better? And the individual behind the wall says that it would break the rhythm, it wouldn't be scanned, and there's a back and forth that is quite sophisticated. But I mean, my experience from interacting with large language models like Claude and GPT is that I have conversations with them on about this level of sophistication. Not every day, but many times a week. So this is something that by now has been achieved. So one other thing that Turing spends most actually, or at least half of his paper on, is to reply to possible criticisms of the view that he defends in connection with this intelligence criterion. And the most interesting part, I think, here is what he calls Lady Lovelace's objection. So Ada Lovelace, as we know, she worked in the mid-18th century together with Charles Babbage on so Babbage built prototype computers, not with electronics, because that wasn't available at the time, but more mechanical things with cogs and wheels and stuff like that. He never finished one, but they thought a lot about this. Ada Lovelace was more on the software side of the project, and she realized she had great visions actually for how they call this the mathematics machine, but Lovelace realized how many different things, including creative stuff like music and so on, could be represented as mathematics. So there was nothing really preventing us from eventually writing programs that would be able to compose songs and so on. But she had a caveat in this discussion. So, okay, the analytical engine was the name of Babbage's machine. She says, it has no pretensions to originate anything. It can only do whatever we know how to order it to perform. So she said, no real originality, no real complexity. And this is like an unbridgeable difference between humans and machines. Turing doesn't accept this. So this, I think this is an 1842 paper. And Turing in 1950, more than 100 years later, says that who can be certain that, quote, original work that he has done was not simply the growth of the seed planted in him by teaching or the effect of following well-known general principles. I mean, he argues that, I mean, think of me standing here lecturing to you and wanting to say something original. If we have the stringent criteria that Ada Lovelace has for what is original and creative, then really nothing I say can be creative. It's just the product of, well, my genes and my education and upbringing and all other environmental factors. And all of these things together determine what I've said. So it's been determined from the outside, and I haven't originated anything. Turing has a counter-suggestion. He says that a better variant of the objection says that a machine can never take us by surprise. So this in Turing's view, is a much better definition of originality and creativity. This statement is a more direct challenge and can be met directly. Machines take me by surprise with great frequency. So not only are the large language models and other generative AI today able to produce texts and images and so on that we were unable to predict, and that surprised us. But this was actually the case already for some of the machines that Turing himself experimented with in the late 40s and early 50s. So it's kind of a gambit here. When someone says machines cannot really think, you press them for what the argument is, and you apply the same argument with whatever minor modification is needed to humans. So you show that actually there must be something wrong with the argument. We'll see more examples of that in a few minutes. Okay, so this was not Turing's only paper from the period with these kinds of visions. He had an earlier 1948 paper called Intelligent Machinery, where he's really exhibiting amazing foresight. And he discusses genetic algorithms and neural networks. Neural networks actually were introduced a few years earlier by two scientists, McCullough and Pitts, in the famous 1943 paper. But it's unclear whether Turing was aware of this paper or not. And he has a long passage where he comes very close to what we now know as reinforcement learning. I'm not going to read this passage to you, but he was very, very interested in machines that we don't just program from scratch what to do, but we initiate them as kind of a blank slate, and then happens a kind of learning process, which he likes to compare to the education of a child. And in this passage, he talks about how you can have punishment and reward as a part of this, which is exactly what's happening in reinforcement learning. In the same paper, he identifies an obstacle to understanding what machines can do, and an obstacle that I think can be clearly seen also today in the 2020s. So here's what Turing says in 1948. There is an unwillingness to admit the possibility that mankind can have any rivals in intellectual power. This occurs as much among intellectual people as amongst others. They have more to lose. Those who admit the possibility all agree that its realization would be very disagreeable. The same situation arises. So now he gives a parallel to the animal kingdom to make it less sounding like a crazy novelty. The same situation arises in connection with the possibility of our being superseded by some other animal species. This is almost as disagreeable, and its theoretical possibility indisputable. And to give an example of what I think is an example like this phenomenon in the 2020s, we have the prevalent talk about large language models as stochastic parrots. which can only cut and paste and repeat things that it has seen during training on the internet. And on some level, I mean, this is a correct description of the so-called pre-training phase of the training of these machines, where they are trained to predict the next word in internet text. But there's also a post-training phase with reinforcement learning to make these machines. So Anthropic introduced this triple H ideal of harmless, helpful, and honest, I think are the 3 H's, and there are lots and lots of stuff like that we train the machines for, which is really different from just merely predicting the next word on internet text. But even if it was the case that this is all they're doing, so that they are in some sense stochastic parrots, or another phrase used here is glorified autocomplete. The idea that the machines cannot exhibit true intelligence is implicitly based on the idea that if you have a system consisting of simple components, then the additions of billions and billions of such components or parameters in the systems can never lead to anything interesting. And this we know is false, because our brains are composed of atoms and elementary particles, very, very simple and totally unintelligent components, and yet we have intelligence. But this has caught on a lot. The particular term stochastic parrots was introduced in a 2021 paper by Emily Bender, a famous linguist, and 3 co-authors. Bender has a book that came out last year, where one might have hoped that she would take a more nuanced view, but it's rather the contrary. And I'll just give a sample passage from the book to show the level of argument. So she suggests that every time we write AI, we should imagine we have a set of scarce quotes around it. Or if you prefer, replace it with a ridiculous phrase. And she suggests mathy maths, a racist pile of linear algebra, stochastic parrots, or the abbreviation SALAMI for systemic approaches to learning algorithms and machine inferences. So the point here is that rather than asking, can AIs think, you should ask, can SALAMIs think? And this is meant to make it more obvious that this is a ridiculous question, when in fact it's not. So the thinking here, I have a favorite quote by tech blogger Scott Alexander from 2019, from around when GPT-2 had just come out. So there's this anonymous AI researcher which is more into this skeptical stochastic parrot line of thinking, saying, I still think GPT-2 is a brute force statistical pattern matcher which blends up the internet and gives you back a slightly unappetizing slurry of it when asked. I mean, I agree. GPT-2 is really, we can hardly remember now with present day large language models how bad GPT-2 was. But this, okay, so what Scott Alexander said then was this kind of turning the argument back against humans, saying, yeah, well, your mom is a brute force statistical pattern matcher blending up the internet, and so on. And this looks like just slogans, but I think that just like how Turing turned Ada Lovelace's arguments on humans, and you can do this on different arguments in the same direction. And I systematized this a little bit in a blog post I wrote in December last year, which I titled Yo Mama. So you can see more examples there and a lot of it takes the form of the mistaken kind of argument that I call reductio ad reductem, that you're able to reduce a system to simple parts, and therefore you draw the conclusion that nothing interesting can happen in these systems. And we have seen enough counterexamples to know that this kind of reasoning is incorrect. Okay, I haven't given you my favorite Turing quote yet, at least in the sense that there's this one that I've repeated in maybe 50 or 100 talks up to now, but Turing has this 1951 BBC radio presentation called Intelligent Machinery, a Heretical Theory. And here's what he says there. My contention is that machines can be constructed which will simulate the behavior of the human mind very closely. Let us now assume for the sake of argument that these machines are a genuine possibility and look at the consequences of constructing them. It seems probable that once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. There would be no question of the machines dying, and they would be able to converse with each other to sharpen their wits. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. And those of you who know me, you know that I worry a lot about this takeover scenario that Turing talks about here. So one example when I gave this quote was in a talk in 2022 to the electrical engineering department here at Chalmers, and I was asked to talk about AI ethics. So I had also quotes from various AI ethics proclamations, such as this one, which I had contributed actually to writing as part of the AI ethics committee of the Chalmers AI Research Center, which had then recently been launched in 2019. And the principle I talk about here is that AI systems whose risk of causing harm is not outweighed by their beneficial effects should not be built or disseminated. When estimating benefit versus harm, it's not always sufficient to consider the problem from the viewpoint of developers, owners, and users of an AI system. In many cases, there are also further stakeholders and third parties, as well as effects on the environment. This fundamental principle should never be allowed to be overridden by commercial, military, or other considerations. There was one colleague in the audience here who asked a really interesting question here, because I had also given this Turing quote. And he asked, if we are to take Turing's prediction seriously, that at some stage we should have to expect the machines to take control, wasn't his fundamental work on computing a breach of this ethical principle? And he caught me a little bit off guard there, because I instinctively want to defend Turing here. So I said something about how those were early days of research ethics. I mean, we had the Manhattan Project at that time, but that was maybe the earliest case where people were really thinking about global, potentially catastrophic effects of scientific advances. So I want to give him credit for at least thinking about the possibility. And I do believe that Turing saw himself much more as a scientist than as an engineer. He saw these Turing machines and more physical machines he was working on mostly as a way of understanding what is human intelligence, what is human thinking. And there are various quotes that support this view. And perhaps the clearest formulation here is in a letter from 1946, where he says that in working on the automatic computing engine, I am more interested in the possibility of producing models of the action of the brain than in the practical applications to computing. Of course, your motivations can never entirely, that you don't want to cause harm or your motivations are a different kind, it cannot give you a free pass to doing any dangerous thing here. But I think that this goes some way towards explaining this tension in Turing's thinking. My next question here is, how did the research community react to Turing's at some stage we should have to expect the machines to take control? And the answer is that for the next half century or so, there was practically no reaction at all. And one could see this clearly in the 1956 very famous Dartmouth conference on artificial intelligence. This is actually the time point when the term artificial intelligence was introduced, and it's widely viewed as the starting point of artificial intelligence research, despite the earlier work by Turing and others. And they were extremely ambitious. The study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can do it. Attempts will be made to find how to make machines use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and also to improve themselves. So they were very, very optimistic. And their program, or the writings that came afterwards, did not at all address the possible risks that I think clearly, if they had achieved these things, it would have been good to think about safety aspects. But there was nothing like that there. And this is how AI research continued for the next 50 years. There are very few counterexamples. One is a 1960 paper by Norbert Wiener, a wonderful paper where he talks about a hypothetical situation where we create a machine so powerful that once we have started it, we won't be in a position to know how to stop it. And he says that in such a situation, we had better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire and not merely a colorful imitation of it. The reason why I like this quote so much is that this final statement here could be taken as the vision or purpose of the research area that we now know of as AI alignment, which is all about making sure that the first really, really powerful AIs have goals and motivations and drives that are compatible with human welfare and flourishing and in line with our own ideals. Not much more happened, as I said, for many decades. So it was only in the 00s that LCA Yudkowsky more or less single-handedly started to build up the area known as AI safety and also AI alignment. And he has an influential 2008 paper. It was influential on me personally, but also more broadly, where he gives what he thinks is the default outcome in case we build superhumanly capable machines without having solved AI alignment. This is the paper, and the quote is, "The AI does not hate you, nor does it love you, but you are made out of atoms which it can use for something else." This is not the kind of conflict we want to end up in with some superhuman, humanly capable opponent. Another early famous name here in the AI safety sphere is Nick Bostrom, and in his 2014 book Superintelligence, which also did a lot to popularize the subject, he talks about the challenge that we're facing in basically the AI alignment problem for superintelligence. And he says that this is quite possibly the most important and most daunting challenge humanity has ever faced. And whether we succeed or fail, it will probably be the last challenge we will ever face. Because either we die or we have machines aligned with us that are so capable that we can just hand over all our problems to them. which maybe is a problem in itself if we worry about things like the meaning of life and so on, and he has further work discussing those questions. And you probably remember in the fall of 2024, Geoffrey Hinton got the physics Nobel Prize and said at the banquet in his acceptance speech that an existential threat will arise when we create digital beings that are more intelligent than ourselves. We have no idea whether we can stay in control, but now we have evidence that if they are created by companies motivated by short-term profits, our safety will not be top priority. We urgently need research on how to prevent these new beings from wanting to take control. They are no longer science fiction. So I'm not going to go in any detail here on why. I mean, there's a growing literature on why this risk is a real thing. But I'm instead going to go on with some quotes from two of the industry leaders here, Sam Altman, head of OpenAI, and his colleague Dario Amodei, who has the corresponding position at Anthropic. So OpenAI was founded in 2015, and a few months before that, Sam Altman famously said in an interview that AI will probably most likely lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime there will be great companies. So there's an awareness here of the problem. I wouldn't take this quote on its own as a sign that Altman is worried about AI existential risk, because this is the kind of thing that you can be maybe expected to say if you want to sound cool and cynical in the way that gives prestige. But he has said many things later that also point towards some awareness, including in 2023, how he repeatedly would say in interviews in response to questions about what's the worst case scenario if you fail to do the AI safety work. And he says that lights out for all of us. Dario Amodei has done something that Sam Altman never did, namely to try and quantify probabilistically in his own subjective Bayesian view of the world, the probability that things go really, really wrong. He says 25%. And he has this recent, so here's a longer quote, which is the final paragraph of a paper that came out in January this year on the adolescence of technology, which I think you all should read because he has a lot of good insight, and this is really a representative vision for what they want to do at Anthropic. And they have similar ideas at OpenAI and so on. And he says, the years in front of us will be impossibly hard, asking for more from us than we think we can give. But in my time as a researcher and citizen and so on, I have seen enough courage and ability to believe that we can win, that when we put in the darkest circumstances, humanity has a way of gathering the strength and wisdom needed to prevail. We have no time to lose. And I mean, I share some of this sentiment, but to have an industry leader say this, he has a kind of self-aggrandizing way of seeing himself as savior of the world in a difficult situation. And I think this is not the ideal psychology to have if we want the industry leaders not to take reckless risks with our lives. The reason we have no time to lose is that technology is moving ahead very, very fast. And I want to spend the last few minutes just giving examples here. And I take examples from math here. The question is, can large language models do math? In 2019, they really couldn't do anything very impressive. So GPT-2 could solve two-digit addition problems. There are interesting questions about how it does this, and more recent AIs do this in more complicated way than just looking up things in an addition table. This is research coming out of Anthropic. In 2020, GPT-3 could do a little bit better, solving the corresponding multiplication problems. 3 years later, we had GPT-4. And in those 3 years, quite a lot happened. Now, GPT-4 scores better than 89% of the participants of the American Häggström, the math part of that. and solving problems such as how many integers between 10 and 500 begin and end with 3. It's not a difficult problem for anyone sitting here, but it's also not a totally standard problem. 2 years later, things had proceeded further, and GPT-5 scores gold on the Math Olympiad and helps top mathematicians like Terence Tao and computer scientist Scott Aronson, who's really leading in the field of quantum computing with key insights to prove new research results. And then benchmarks and stuff are reached very rapidly. In January, GPT 5.2 was the first machine to independently solve a well-known open problem in mathematics. Something similar happened in February when Claude Opus scooped Donald Knuth in solving a problem in combinatorics he had been working on, and Knuth had. The story is a little bit more complicated than what I'm saying here, but I invite you to read his short, wonderful paper, Claude's Cycles. It's just 5-6 pages, and anyone who is tempted to have this stochastic parrots kind of thinking where the machines are just repeating things that it's read on the internet, you will be cured from that idea if you read this part. And things keep happening, and I want to mention also this podcast from last week. Dwarkesh Patel is one of the best podcasters in the tech sphere, and he has this hour-long discussion with Terence Tao, who now spends most of his time figuring out efficient ways to use large language models to do mathematics research. And he has an attitude here which he has no sentimentality for the way that we used to do mathematics research. So this reminds me a little bit of how von Neumann was thinking when in 1946 or so he launched a project at the Institute for Advanced Study, where they were to build a machine, build one of these first computers, and many of his math colleagues were against this. Math is something that you do with a blackboard and chalk or pen or pencil, but this is really not something they would like. I think this could revolutionize mathematical research a lot more than the computer revolution in the 50s and 60s did. We'll see. We can also look a bit more broadly. Mathematics is just an example, and there's this excellent 2025 paper which gives some empirical evidence. They're looking at large language models competencies within fields like software engineering, coding, mathematics, and so on. All of these things are stuff that is particularly relevant for AI research, and the question of when, if ever, can AIs take over AI research. And here is, I think, the most important diagram that was published in 2025. We have an ordinary time axis on the x-axis ranging from 2019 and a couple of years into the future. The y-axis is also, it's logarithmic, and it's also a time axis. And it's a measure of how deep problems the AIs can solve, as measured by how long time does it take for human experts to solve these problems. And we see an increase from just a couple of seconds in 2019 to an hour or so at the time of the writing of the paper. The straight line here, of course, corresponds to an exponential increase on the linear scale, and if you look at the slope of the line, you can see you can read off the doubling time, which here happens to be 7 months. Nobody knows where this is going. There were some speculations in late 2025 that maybe things were starting to flatten out. GPT-5 was said to be a disappointment, but this was more or less on the level of an urban legend, and I had the opportunity to debate this on Swedish public radio, because when you look actually at the numbers and plot GPT-5 on the meter diagram, you see that GPT-5 is clearly above the curve and higher than any machines before that. So the reason why some debaters here thought that GPT-5 was a disappointment has to be found in other reasons than just the level of capabilities. What has happened? So here's the linear plot to make. This is the same diagram with a linear y-axis, and GPT-5 is up here. So this was in August or September last year. In January last year, GPT-5 is down here, and new models were scoring many hours longer. Here's GPT 5.2. So this is the diagram that I used in another talk I gave a month ago, and the latest thing puts GPT 5.2 down here, and Claude Opus 4.6 is already at 12 hours or something like that. Confidence intervals here are broad, so there are some reason to take these numbers with a grain of salt, but we have very, very strong indications that things are happening fast, and the most important thing here to think about is perhaps when we get to the point where the machines can emulate an AI researcher or engineer, when it's on the level of the best AI researchers today. And former OpenAI researcher Leopold Aschenbrenner suggested in a famous report from 2024 that this might happen around 2027, and at that point we get a kind of a feedback mechanism that accelerates development, so that even on a logarithmic scale we see a marked acceleration and can perhaps reach superintelligence levels quite soon. And then all these issues around AI safety really come to the forefront. Nobody knows for sure whether we'll hit this inflection point and what exactly will happen, but there are models that are studied and to which empirical data are fed. This is very interesting work and points towards the possibility that we might see actually explosive improvement even without hardware improvement, purely on the software side. This goes back to earlier ideas about intelligence explosion and singularity. Maybe you've seen this book by Ray Kurzweil from 2005, predicting a singularity in 2045. Now that, at that time, that seemed like a very techno-optimistic suggestion, and now it seems maybe hard to motivate that things would proceed so slowly. This is a paper by mathematician Ray Solomono from 1985, where he looks at, he models intelligence explosion with differential equations and shows how things can become quantitatively quite different with this feedback mechanism. This goes back further to I.J. Good, who was actually a collaborator with Turing at Bletchley Park, and he introduced this notion of an ultra-intelligent machine that can do anything man can do, but even better. And he noticed that since the design of machines is one of these intellectual activities, it could design even better machines, and there would unquestionably be an intelligent explosion leaving man far behind. And in fact, we can even go back to Alan Turing and see I think he foresaw some of these ideas. So there's one 1947 lecture where he again underlines how important it is to view programs and data as kind of the same entity. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. The possibility of letting the machine alter its own instructions provides the mechanism for this. And also, in what I already gave, my favorite quote, I usually emphasize this final sentence, as I did at some stage. Therefore, machines can be expected to take control. But there are two other sentences here that point towards this recursive loop of self-improvement. Once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip over feeble powers. They would be able to converse with each other to sharpen their wits. Okay, I'll stop there. Turing did not get the recognition he deserved during his lifetime, but he has received some now. Here's a sculpture from 2001 in his final hometown, Manchester. These are the two books that I had most use for in preparing this talk. The 2013 anthology with lots and lots of commentary from some of the greatest AI and cognitive science experts at the time, and the biography by Hodges that I already mentioned. Thank you for your attention.